Hi, everyone. This is Michael Cavaccini. Welcome. I have a wonderful opportunity today to be interviewing Heather Wixson. I first discovered Heather years ago when I watched the first In Search of Darkness horror documentary, and her commentary caught my eye. And I've been following her career ever since, and glad to speak with her today because Heather actually is the author of the In Search of Darkness book, which is now available. She's written for a variety of publications. She's a horror historian, and I discovered when I was setting up this interview a lover of pro wrestling as well. So Heather, welcome and thank you for joining me today to talk about WrestleMania, the In Search of Darkness book, and a whole lot more. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I get to talk about all my favorite things, so I'm very excited.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, just because of, as we record this, we're basically a week removed from WrestleMania. So let's kind of kick it off with that. I mean, so I'm in Philadelphia. I was literally where WrestleMania was happening. So I
Oh,
actually attended the show.
wow.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've been waiting like 25 years or however long it's been for it to come back to Philly because when I was here the first time, I think I was in seventh grade or eighth grade, and I was just not going to wrestling events by myself. So that just was not an option back then. So, but the thing that's funny is back then, The Rock was in WrestleMania, and this time, The Rock was in WrestleMania. So I got to see The Rock wrestle at WrestleMania that many
That
years later. But where did you watch the show from? And, what did you think of the two nights?
yeah, like we were dialed in. Like WrestleMania weekend is huge for us just because I mean, not only is it WrestleMania, but also there's just like a really great opportunity to catch up with like a lot of different wrestlers from a ton of different um companies from around the world. So it really is like a big thing. Like I actually took like vacation time off from work so I could keep up with all the indie stuff going on because it really started to like hit in like on Thursday last week. So getting to kind of really experience all kinds of things that I had never really seen before. Like one of my favorite shows that I caught up with it, like it's a company I never even watched before, was called Defy. When they're based out of like I think Seattle, Oregon area. And that was really cool. And just getting to see like Wrestling Revolver take on House of Glory and getting to see the Women of Stardom. There's just so many different things, and that's what I love about it. Like at first, I know years ago they kind of like WWE was trying to like fight this thing, but I love that they've embraced it because I think it's a really great way because you have to give people options. And I think the people who are like going with their kids to the WWE, like sort of their own little version of WrestleMania Comic Con, they're probably not going to be going to the indie shows. So you have to give people different options and things like that. But overall, like I was really impressed because, it seems like the 10, 20, 30, 40, they're always like the big shows for a reason. Um, and I will say it's kind of funny because me and my other half, like we're both wrestling nerds who kind of grew up watching wrestling separately. Like he was at WrestleMania 10, I was at WrestleMania 20. And to this very day, like our biggest regret is not going to WrestleMania 30 because of Daniel Bryan. And missing that whole thing because we were so like pissed kind of because they were like treating him terribly. We're like, oh, he's not even in the Royal Rumble. Like, what's gonna happen? Like, forget it, we're out. And then they did all the swerving and stuff like that. And they're like, and then seriously, like 2 weeks earlier, like we're like, oh, I think this is all gonna happen and we're not going and this is terrible. Um, so yeah, so I think 40. I mean, the thing with the Cody Rhodes stuff, I mean, I to me felt very much like they were recreating the Daniel Bryan sort of moment from 30, where it's like, oh, this guy's not going to get his main event. Oh, wait, guess he is, but he's got to work for it a little bit. And I was like, oh, that's so WrestleMania 30 right there. But I think they did it in a really interesting way, and I think it really paid off for the fans. Because honestly, when they did that press conference where things were like a little bit of melee and stuff, I legitimately said to my other half, I'm like, oh, what they really need to do is do a tag team match on night one, have, Rock and Roman because Rock can then wrestle. He doesn't have to carry the burden of an entire match, versus Cody and Seth. And sure enough, that's kind of how it all worked out. But yeah, I think overall, like it felt like a really good match, like a good 2 nights that really delivered for the hardcore fans. I think they were smart about a lot of things. I think they knew if they didn't quote unquote finish the story, especially in Philadelphia. Like they might have burned that place down because I think people would have lost it. Because I was in LA last year, um, for how WrestleMania goes Hollywood, and we went to night two only. And like we've been sort of like checked out a little bit on the WWE side over the last few years, probably like since like late 2019. It just wasn't clicking for us, but we would watch like the big shows here and there and just kind of kept up with it tangentially. And then so we went to night two that night, and like I'm also like an AEW person, like where I was watching AEW since day one. Cody going back over to WWE made sense because I just don't know. I don't know why the AEW fans like turned on Cody the way that they did, but they were relentless. And I get it. Like, why would you want to stick around in a situation like that when you have a chance to go to a different company, rebuild your legacy, and get to do things like on your own terms and actually have fans embrace you and understand like your passion for it? But I will say there was part of me that was like, people were like, kids were crying, like legit sobbing around us. People were like angry. And there is like the slightly evil part of me that was kind of cackling on the inside, being like, oh, you guys really thought he was going to do this? Like, it's Roman. Like, what do you think's going to happen? Like, obviously, people behind the scenes were still different. So there was other people probably calling those shots. And I was like, yeah, there's no way Cody's winning this. Like, it's Roman Reigns. Like, he's been the guy, pretty much steadily since 2020. Um, but I will say it was nice to see him really have a nice build up to this. And I think overall, like it was just a really well put together show. And I was really happy that my prediction about Damian Priest cashing in worked out as well as it did because I was like, oh yeah. I was like, Drew's gonna get his moment, but Damian's coming, and sure enough. And it was such a good setup too with Punk. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. It's like usually the last few years, like we'll watch Mania. We kind of watch the Raw after Mania, and we're kind of like, okay, cool. We'll see you guys like for SummerSlam or something like that. Um, we watched Monday Night Raw. We'll probably be watching SmackDown tonight because we're kind of back in the mix, which was nice. It was nice to kind of get that little bit of a like reinvigoration for it. But I'm also understanding of what it is more now. I'm not as emotionally attached. Like there is a very different approach that they do there than you see in other companies. So I'm just kind of like I'm enjoying the ride, but I'm not turning into like the people who basically obsess over it on social media all the time because it was exhausting last week. And I don't know how much you saw, but it was every little tidbit was just a fight and a war. And I was just like, just watch wrestling. Who cares? Like, there's so much good stuff out there. Just watch what you like. Who cares if you don't like something? Just move on. I don't know who has that kind of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so for me, give you a quick recap of my week. So my week actually started last Wednesday. So I years ago I interviewed Mark Marrow, who, for those of you who are as old as us, he was Johnny B. Bad in WCW, and then he obviously is the husband of Sable, right? So he was in the WWF. He actually was the first pro wrestler in the WWF to get a guaranteed contract back in the day. So I interviewed him a couple times, and I remember saying to him after seeing video clips of him doing his inspirational speaking, which is what he does now, like 250 events a year, speaking at schools about making wise choices and all that stuff. And I was like, man, I'd love to see you do this live because I bet it's really inspirational in person. And he said, a while back, yeah, sure, whenever I'm in the Philly area, let me know and you can come. So I saw that WrestleMania week, like the last Wednesday, was going to be in Eagleville, which was close enough. It was like in 45 minutes an hour. So I said, yeah, I'll drive there. So I said, Mark, can I come? And he said, sure. You just got to come into the school with me because they can't let you in otherwise. I'm like, okay. So I went in. I met him at like 7 in the morning. It was like raining out.
Oh, wow.
He pulled up next to me and felt like I was like doing a drug deal or something. And we went in and got to hang out with him for a while, talk, got a photo with him in the Intercontinental Championship. And I was telling him I'm a teacher and all these things. And uh, went into this gorgeous auditorium. And later on, 600 seventh and eighth graders came in. And I was like front row center just waiting for him to do his whole talk. And man, he talks about choices. It's all about choices and how he wanted to be rich and famous because that would make him happy. He could buy the house, he could buy the Cadillac, all these things he wanted in it for his life, and how his life got derailed because of bad choices, and then how multiple family members passed away through the years and the effect that had on him, and how he shouldn't have taken his relationships for granted. I mean, it was really heart-wrenching at points. I was like blowing my nose. When he was done, I said, Mark, I went through so many tissues. And he said, well, you got to hit him here, meaning like in the heart, if you want to change them here. Right. And so that's his point, is like emotional storytelling is so important. And he knows that when he tells these stories, he can't be phoning it in. He actually has to kind of relive it and tell it in such an emotional way where you are moved. Like when he mentioned during his presentation that his mother died, I literally heard kids behind me go, like they all audibly gasped. And after he talked to these kids, and there was one girl was saying she wants to be a psychologist, and she was really appreciates what he, shared with everyone that day. Another one was upset and crying, and she's like, I'm so sorry about everything you had to go through. Like they were literally moved by this. And I was like, boy, this guy's doing some amazing work. And kind of like Diamond Dallas Page, he has this second chapter in his life where a lot of people know him only for this, not necessarily as being a wrestler. And he's doing so much good and positivity for the world that I hope now that Vince McMahon is out, that Mark Marrow gets inducted into the Hall of Fame at some point, just purely based on the good he's doing for the world right now. And yes, he also is in TNA, WCW, WWE. He's part of the Attitude Era. Like he deserves it to at least be inducted in the Hall of Fame. And without him, we wouldn't have had Sable. So who knows? Brock Lesnar might be single. Uh,
Yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms right there.
but that was my Wednesday. So I kicked things off with
Wow.
that. And then Thursday and Friday did WWE World, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's like the old school WrestleMania access where you do meet and greets, you go to the convention center, get photos of the people, autographs, stuff like that, superstars. And then Friday night was SmackDown and the Hall of Fame. And that went to 1 a.m. Because they decided to tack the Hall of Fame after SmackDown. And holy cow, I got to ask you about this. What did you think of Paul Heyman's inductions speech? Did you watch that?
I did, yeah. I mean, Paul's a legend. In fact, my other half was like, he grew up in Connecticut, like literally right down the street from WWF, and then went to school in Philly. So I think he legitimately just went to school there because of ECW. So we actually have like this ginormous like VHS library of ECW tapes. So he would like buy every show and like tape stuff and everything like that. So Paul Heyman is a huge fixture. It was good. It was really like it was good that he was finally getting acknowledged. And then part of me was kind of like, why wasn't he in it before? Because it's not like he just kind of came back to WWE. He'd been working there doing stories and like obviously working with the tribal chief for a while. And I was just like, why didn't this happen before? It's Paul Heyman. Um, so it was nice to see him get his due. And it was also cool because I saw like a lot of behind the scenes photos of a bunch of ECW guys were there. Like I think Tommy Dreamer was there, RVD was there. I think Bully Ray was there as well. Gosh, there was somebody else where I was really surprised that they were there. Nothing as shocking as like Sabu, um, who didn't show up for his own induction into the Indie Hall of Fame. But it was nice because I feel like Philly, perfect place to do that. Um, it was sort of a nice way to kind of put that chapter of professional wrestling, like almost like in a time capsule in a lot of ways, where it was like, we're never going to have that again. So let's take this moment in the best city possible to celebrate it in the best venue possible, like, and just really give Paul the flowers he deserves because I think so many people respect him, but I think just being able to really get to call himself a Hall of Famer. I don't even really honestly know what a Hall of Famer really means because it's not like there's an actual Hall of Fame. But I think it's cool. And honestly, anything that like acknowledges the work and dedication that goes into making that industry like actually work and deliver for fans, like I think should always be recognized because there's just so much I think that people kind of forget about as they're caught up in the entertainment of it all. In fact, like I remember seeing um Iron Claw like right around the same time Rumble happened, and Like it was just one of those, like, you kind of forget sometimes, like, how much people put on the line to entertain us in terms of like the physicality and the sacrifices that come with it, a lot of times in the personal side of things. And you sort of see the Von Erich story, and I like, it just was like, oh my God, like, thanks. Like, thank you for doing that for us because you don't owe it to us. Like, nobody owes us anything. And I didn't realize at the time like how hurt he was. And I guess I should back up a little. So I've gotten over the years to sort of know just a little bit, like, on the tiniest like spectrum of everything. I've gotten to know Punk. He was super freaking cool to me. He did a movie with Travis Stevens years ago called Girl on the Third Floor, and it was at South by Southwest. And I made like a really funny tweet about like what I thought of the movie because I thought it was like, I liked it a lot. And I guess he like quoted me in an interview to like IndieWire or something. And so I was in the room trying to not freak out about having to do these interviews for the movie. And he just walked up and he's like, "Oh, you're Heather Wixson?" And I was like, "Shut up. Like, no, shut up. That's no, you don't come up to me. I go up to you." And he was like, "Oh, yeah, I was just talking about you." And I was like, "Okay, come on. What?" And so we kind of got to know each other a little bit. And like, it was fun. Like during COVID, like we were trying to do some different things on Daily Dead. And I was like, "Hey, Phil, you want to like write up about a movie?" And I think he did like Empire Strikes Back because he loves Star Wars and stuff. And like, we did podcasts together and things like that. And it was just like, he was super freaking cool to me, like in ways I wasn't expecting. And he didn't owe it to me at all because what the heck was I going to offer him? I was already invested in the movie at that point. Like, it wasn't like to get a good review out of me. Um, but like, so we'll like, like email for time to time and stuff. And I just said to him, like, when he was doing the Rumble, and I was like, "Oh man, I just wanted to say, like, I know this is stupid, like, hokey." And I was like, "But thanks, like, I'm so happy for you that you're getting to go back and do what you want to do um on your own terms now." And then like, and also just thanks because I knew he had such a run of like bad luck in AEW with the physical stuff. And I was like, just thank you. I know it's a lot to put on yourself. And I just hope you know that like fans appreciate what you guys do for us because it's a lot. And then literally like that night, it was revealed that like his arm was all messed up. And I was like, "Oh, that was a poorly timed email." Because like in the middle, he's probably like trying to organize surgery. And I'm just like, "Hey, thanks for putting it all out there and not realizing what really had happened." Um, so like I just, for me, having the respect for what anybody does in this industry, whether it's the big leagues, the little leagues, whatever you want to call it, um, as a fan of that, like it never goes unappreciated on my part because it's all for the benefit of the fans. Like, yeah, they're gonna get paid and stuff, but like, it's like that sort of funny saying, like, at what cost? Because it really is, there is a heavy toll that they have to pay. And I think like we see that especially through like shows like Dark Side of the Ring, where so many of the things you like don't even realize about people that you grew up loving or enjoy now. And you're like, "Oh my God, I'm sorry it was so hard for you." I grew up being a huge Brutus the Barber Beefcake fan. I didn't realize like a lot of the things that he was dealing with behind the scenes because I only, we didn't have the internet back then. You just kind of get what you get. And so kind of seeing like that kind of stuff or like, you know, like we just watched this episode on like this indie guy who we'd never heard of, which is crazy. My other half is like an encyclopedic memory when it comes to like independent wrestling. And he didn't know who Chris Colt was. I didn't either, but this is a guy who came up like in the 60s, 70s, and 80s who is doing the crazy stuff that you're seeing from the 90s till now, like in ways that was just like pushing the boundaries like so far. Like the boundary is like 3 miles back, and Chris Colt's over here, and he's crazy. Um, but he went through a lot because he was like an openly gay wrestler, and a lot of people really looked down on him about that. And like he was the first guy who ever came out to entrance music in the 70s. He came out to Alice Cooper like before it was ever a thing, and he turned it into like a whole theatrical production. So that kind of stuff, like I love that stuff. And I just getting like, for me, Hall of Fame, like I don't know what it really means, but for me personally, it's just a way to say thank you in some sort of moment that people deserve. And again, I was kind of like, wait, Muhammad Ali is like the person, like the celebrity in the celebrity wing. Like, how was that not already? Like, he was in WrestleMania 1. How did that not happen already? So it was nice to kind of see sort of some folks who've been such a part of like the legacy of modern wrestling gets their flowers. And especially Paul. Like Paul's just he's there's only ever going to be one Paul Heyman. There's been a lot of guys who've tried to be Paul Heyman and they will never come close. So it was cool.
Yeah, no, that's
Such a
awesome. And
long-winded answer, and I'm so sorry.
no, no, that was good though. You brought it back. No, I thought his induction speech was amazing. He got away with so many things, and he didn't hold back. And but then he also gave Triple H props, which was great. And yeah, it was really fantastic. And as you were talking, I was thinking of things too. Like you have the relationship with CM Punk. That's awesome. I've developed a relationship with a bunch of wrestlers, but mainly Diamond Dallas Page over the years because he's one of those guys where like I interviewed him back in 2018 for his book that he had that came out, Positively Unstoppable. And I'd done DDP yoga off and on up to that point, but it's kind of like until you're like having chronic pain, you kind of like figure why work out. Uh, then I was like, oh wait, I should be doing yoga more. I'm like getting older. It makes sense. And I remember him saying to me like, because at the time he had an Airbnb, you could actually stay at the accountability crib where he rehabilitated Jake the Snake and Scott Hall. And I said, oh, when I come to Atlanta, I'd love to stay there. And he said, well, he's like, you've got my number, bro. Text me when you're in the area. And I was like, really? And he was real. So I actually stayed there in 2019, actually WrestleMania weekend. And what a weekend that was. I got there WrestleMania day, and then I wound up finding out that like Jake the Snake Roberts was going to be there the whole week with me. Not like that wasn't like planned. It was just like he was living there, and he was just going to be there the week that I was there. So it was just me and him in the house the whole week. So I'm like watching Star Trek with Jake the Snake Roberts, and he's making me steak, and I'm like, what the hell life is this? It was crazy, and but DDP was true to his word. I texted him. He came over, actually with Anthony Ogogo from AEW at the time. He was
Mhm.
telling me that this guy, this former boxer, is training to be a wrestler, and Jake's talking to him about what it takes to be a wrestler and all that. And I'm just like fly on a wall, and got to go to the DDP Yoga Performance Center and all this stuff. And but yeah, Dallas is one of those people where he's like not only helping people, like right now he's helping Lex Luger overcome his physical issues and things with through DDP yoga. And I was watching that Scott Hall documentary, and I was just thinking about that when you were talking about Dark Side of the Ring. Because I remember when I was talking to Jake at Dallas's house back in 2019, that I was like, "Oh, how's Scott doing?" And he kind of made a face where he was kind of saying it without saying it that Scott got back into his old ways, right?
Yeah.
And Jake was telling me that he can't risk doing that himself because he doesn't want to let down all the people that he's inspired through his story, through that documentary and everything. He doesn't want to let them down. And I told him, I said, "Yeah, you've inspired millions of people through your comeback and everything, and yeah, it's remarkable." So and I just met Hulk Hogan over the weekend too. I got a picture with him on Sunday, and I remember I went. I wanted to get on a certain side of him because, like I said to him, I was like, "This is my good side." He's like, "Well, both my sides are my bad side, brother. I've been beat up so many times, I'm just falling apart or something like that." And I said, "Well, you look pretty damn good to me because I mean, for being in the '70s, he looks awesome." And it made me think like we have people, just regular, average, everyday people who have some sort of ailment, some sort of disability, whatever it is. And they just kind of let themselves wither away and they just sit on the couch and they're bitter and they just bitch about life. Now, Hulk Hogan is still in the gym. Like he looks amazing despite having what, I don't know, 15 surgeries, back surgeries or some ridiculous number. Like he could have
Yeah.
easily just said, I'm going to be like, the Dynamite Kid or something and just be bitter and hate the industry and all that. But no, Hogan literally is still in the gym and he maintains his look. And I think it's not just for us, but I think it's also for him. He realizes that it's part of his confidence. It's part of, maintaining a healthy mindset. And for these guys to be willing to do that when they have every reason in the world at an older age to just kind of be bitter or whatever, I think is inspirational. And I know Hogan gets flack and stuff, But the thing that I was saying to a few people is like, yeah, okay, Hogan slipped up a few years ago and said something stupid. He apologized for it. Meanwhile, people thought Vince McMahon was God until most recently, uh, with all these allegations and everything. And I still heard people chanting for Vince McMahon at WrestleMania. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Meanwhile, Hulk Hogan says, a bad word like, once, and he gets crucified for it. And Vince McMahon literally profits off of the exploitation of minorities, wearing a do rag and doing all sorts of just ridiculous and offensive things decade after decade after decade, and just got everyone's like, oh well, it's funny, and I was just
Yeah.
like, what is going on with the world? Where like, how do we balance those two things out? Because it makes zero sense to me. I had a long interview with Kevin Nash a few years ago, and he was totally in agreement. We both love Hulk Hogan, think people need to get over it, and just if we're a culture that just cancels and doesn't believe in rehabilitation or forgiveness, what does that say about us, right? Shouldn't we be forgiven? I think we should. I mean, that's just my opinion. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I know it was a little bit of a rant there, but it's just I get
Yeah,
worked
no,
up over that.
yeah, no, I totally agree because like ultimately like what we're saying is like we don't want people to do better or be better, or that's when you screw up once, like that's it. And that's not really how society is. Like if somebody goes to jail, like are we giving up on them for the perpetuity of their lifetime? Like we shouldn't. Like I mean, in certain cases, if somebody's going around and they murder like 150 people and, burning down like children orphanages, okay, that's something different. But I'm talking about like, somebody has to go steal because like of their economic situation, then they get stuck in jail for 10 years and then they come out of jail. Like, what are they supposed to do? Because like our society has been built to like keep them unhoused, unemployed. What are they going to do? Well, they're going to probably go back to what they were doing because how else are they going to survive? We've given them no chance to sort of become a part of it all. And I think the Hogan thing is like really tough for me because one, I mean, I'm white. Like I'm in no position to tell anybody how they should feel about what he said. Um, so I found it extremely disappointing. I haven't really like I don't I'm not like angry at him, but it's still kind of like really Hogan. Did you have to like I mean, and the thing is it's like the reality is like he said it once. I mean, that's the one time he got caught. I don't know, but what I'm hoping is that I'm hoping that it was as my grandmother would say, like a come to Jesus moment where he was like, okay, this is really wrong thinking. This is obviously really poor language choices. What do I need to do to become a better person? Because this was obviously terrible. And the thing is, I know he talked to a lot of like black wrestlers, like in WWE when they started to kind of bring him back here and there, um, and really work things out with them. That's really who he owes it to. He doesn't owe me anything because he let like I had a poster of Hulk Hogan above my bed as a kid, but he doesn't owe me anything. But he does owe something to the people that he was talking to. So it's tough because I get it. Like I'm never gonna sit tell somebody like if they're still angry about it, like that they're wrong. But I do think like I mean, internet, we're so used to just overreacting to everything. I mean, I feel like a lot of people log on every day with their pitchfork ready and they're just looking for the next fight.
Yeah.
Um, which is just exhausting. It's such a just terrible way to live, I think. I have way too much going on to be able to do that, so I just can't. Um, so it sucks because like there's obviously I mean, there is no modern professional wrestling without Hulk Hogan. And it sucks that his legacy has become complicated. Obviously, that complication comes from his own choices. It's not really on the fans to feel bad for that, but at the same time, like he didn't murder somebody. He's not on trial for, he's not going to be on trial for sex trafficking and things like that. And also, let's not forget that I believe Vince McMahon even uttered that word on live TV at some point,
I,
as well while wearing the do rag. Um,
right. So he
not that
literally
like
made money off of hate language. Like,
yeah, and so like again, it's not my place to tell anybody how to feel about it. But wrestling, the environment itself is it's just a whole different thing. I think that normal society runs in, and especially during the era of the 70s and 80s and 90s, where like I'm seeing like so we have the whole punk Jack Perry thing, right? And I'm seeing so many people freaking out about punk. Basically, like Jack Perry, you could see in his body language is getting all snarky and sarcasmy and doing little things, and then punk reacts physically because punk's old school, and like that's just like that's how it ran back then. Like I don't know that people understand, like there was some really carny crap that was going on back in the day where like if you mouthed off, you got dealt with. And no, I'm not saying it's right, but that's the nature of that business. Like everyone's like, well, if you did this in corporate America, I'm like, but it's not corporate America. It's something totally different. And so it's tough because everybody like wants to be like, oh my God, Punk is a terrorist. He's like, he should be in jail. And I was like, for that? He literally like grabbed him for like 6 seconds. Like, I mean, what? Like, I mean, literally, people like, I think there's a petition going around where they're like, we need to show Tony Khan that we support him going after Punk for like criminal charges. And again, there is a bias, but like, and also I loved Jungle Boy. Like, I watched him for years in GCW. I was so excited to see him go to AEW. He's a Valley Village guy. I live near Valley Village. Like, I only wanted good things for him. And then that whole scenario played out. And I was disappointed in everybody in that situation, to be really honest, because it just felt like after that, AEW just kind of like deflated. And we don't really watch regularly that much anymore. Like we watch the shows, but that's kind of it. Um, so, but it's interesting to me that like as soon as that footage came out this week, and like everybody was like, "Oh my God, like Punk's like the worst person." Like I'm like, really? Like you should go and listen to some stories from stuff that was going on in the 70s and 80s where guys are getting shot. And I'm not again not saying it's right. But what I'm saying is like it's the that business is built on physicality and almost like an emotional storytelling, right? Like you have to, and they tie in together. So yeah, like that stuff is going to bleed over into the real life aspects of it. But yeah, I just kind of wish like that whole scenario didn't happen, like because I think we'd be looking at a very different landscape for wrestling, and the tribalism online is just. I've actually like had to start unfollowing so many different people in wrestling, which bums me out. But I just can't do it anymore. Where literally my timeline is literally like AEW is the worst, no WWE is the worst. Like it's constant. And I'm just like, who cares? If you like AEW, watch it. Talk about what you love about it. If you watch WWE, watch it. Talk about what you love about it. I don't give a crap about the other stuff. Like you're never like it's like politics. You're never going to convince the other side why the thing you agree like believe in is the better thing. So just move on. You know what I mean? Like it's just last weekend was so exhausting, and every little tidbit that every little show, it was just a thing. But I will say the one thing that I thought was super exciting about last week was really actually seeing WWE for the first time ever embrace the indies, because that like we talk about the forbidden door and things like that, and I'd never seen WWE do that before with Bloodsport, and I thought that was super cool. Because Shayna coming in there and wrestling or having a match with Masha Slamovich, who is like one of my favorite wrestlers. I love her so much. It was great. It was so cool. And then seeing William Regal's kid come in and also having a match as well. And he won as well, too. And then I think they even talked about it on NXT this week, where he was like, yeah, I was over at Bloodsport, and I was like, that 10 years ago, that never would have happened. Like, none of that would have happened. And getting to see Shayna in like a really cool environment like that, because she's so badass. Like, and you just want to see her rip into somebody, but she can't do it in a WWE ring, right? So you have to put her in an environment and just let her run wild. And she did. She was awesome. So if anybody out there has never like watched like an indie show or something, Bloodsport is like a really good sort of gateway. Because it's different. It's not typical wrestling. It's like no ropes, very different sort of approach to how the matches play out. And it's really cool. And there's like so many good like people involved. But it was really that was a big oh wow moment for me, was seeing like WWE working in the indie space. And I hope there's more of it. Like there's not it's not a competition. Like companies like GCW or Wrestling Revolver or like AAW, like they're not trying to compete with WWE. They're just trying to further the sport of wrestling in a different way on a much different level, you know? So I think just this idea of like everything has to be competition is just bogus.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I'm actually writing a book about the first 20 years of TNA. Um,
Oh, nice. I
yeah,
remember like when you had to pay for the like when they launched and you had to pay for the weekly shows. I remember.
yeah. It's their first 20 years is fascinating. I mean, and I had the opportunity to interview everyone. I mean, I reached out to everyone and their mother. I mean, I interviewed all the executives from Spike TV, the guys from Midway who created the video game, the executives from Fox Sports Net, the woman who runs Universal Studios Orlando, where they rented the space for TNA Impact, and so much. And it's just, and you're talking about AEW being, kind of deflated. It made me think of TNA because, like, I feel like they suffered from that recently because when Scott D'Amore was let go, they kind of
Mm-hmm.
lost that energy. Because when they rebranded as TNA, Scott's like, we're effing back and all that. It was like, wow, okay, this is awesome. And Scott was like, I feel like you need a visionary leader like him in charge, like Triple H, where it's like, okay, they're from this industry, they get it, they're kind of our representative as a fan behind the scenes. Now, I know that Tommy Dreamer, Gail Kim, and all them are obviously still doing the creative and everything for TNA, but having a corporate entity, I guess, kind of in charge of the future of a company, I guess, is problematic. So, I mean, I'm still going. I'm going to see TNA again in June, and I went in March, and it's great and everything. But for me, the way I look at it is like rather than just being one of these like keyboard warriors online who's just bitching all the time and filled with hate, I look at it as like, hey, my book's going to be about these 20 amazing years. Just because you may not be happy with the current state of a company that you do or don't watch doesn't erase the things that you do enjoy or did enjoy, right? Those still exist. And in this streaming environment, chances are you could watch that stuff ad nauseum. So, or watch your old DVDs, whatever you want. So it's like people who get upset about books get turned into movies, and they're like, the book's better. It's like, okay, then go read the book, right? Like we didn't burn your
Yeah.
books, like there's no need to be angry just because you don't like the movie, you don't like the TV show or what. Just read the book, right? And let the people who enjoy the other medium enjoy the other medium. Like it's okay. But
Yeah.
some people like are looking for a reason, like you're
To be
saying, with
mad.
those pitchforks and the torches to be like just to be hate. And that's why I love people like Mark Marrow and DDP, where it's like they're the opposite. Like I wish I could be as positive and as they are sometimes. It's hard, I tell you, it is hard. But I like it's so much better to make someone smile than to make someone angry. Because it's infectious, right? Someone laughs, you laugh. Someone smiles, you smile. I'd much rather have that than like someone being anxious and angry, and then I'm just like, ugh, unnerved by it. Like no one wants to feel that. So why make someone else feel that? So I think, yeah, wrestling's supposed to be escapism, right? We have enough BS in the news, politics, and all that to be legitimately upset and concerned over. Scripted drama should not be something that we're
Yeah.
getting worked up over because it's supposed to be our escape from the realities of life. That's the way I look at it, at least.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, for example, like this week, they announced that they're doing some headlines called it a remake, some headlines called it a reboot. I don't know what they're actually doing, but the one that I responded to was like they were talking about doing a remake of Blair Witch, which, like, especially in the year that's the 25th anniversary of the movie, I was like, it feels a little weird and disrespectful. But the thing is, it's like, good luck with that. Because that movie is such a singular experience. It was such a moment in time that can never be duplicated. And immediately calling it a remake of Blair Witch, you've already set yourself up on a certain level of like a pedestal. Um, So you have so much to live up to as opposed to just being like, hey, we're going to make another Blair Witch movie. Like they could have done that and like saved themselves a lot of the grief that they're going to get over this. Um, and that's the thing. Like, I don't even get mad about remakes anymore. There's only one remake I ever got mad about. And that's just because it's personal. But like, I don't because it's like, it's just going to happen. And the thing is, it's like, yeah, so they're going to remake Blair Witch. I don't know how it's going to go. I hope whoever gets involved, I hope it's a good experience for them. I hope it comes out the way they want it to. But it's never going to erase the original Blair Witch. I can still go watch that anytime. So like, people who get mad at that like kind of blow my mind. My favorite though is when we get new adaptations of Stephen King novels and they call that a remake, where I'm like, no, it's a new adaptation. Like it's not necessarily a remake because if you're already talking about a movie based on a like you're getting into so many semantics, but it's like if you're talking about a movie based on a book, and then another movie comes out, like it's just a new adaptation, it's a new interpretation. Like I wouldn't call Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet from the 90s a remake of Zeffirelli's, Romeo and Juliet from the 70s. It's just a new take on the story. So, yeah, I think everybody just needs to feel mad about something. And I'm like, there's plenty of real things to be mad at in this world right now. That's cool. And I get it. Go do that. But like, getting mad because they're going to do another movie, like, whatever at this point. I don't know. Maybe it's just like being older and not having the energy to care about it as much. If I was in my 20s, maybe I'd have a little more to say about it. But I'm like, whatever. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. I mean, remakes have been happening since the 80s. Like, what do you like 70s, 80s? Like, what are you gonna do? I don't know how many like
Totally.
in I don't know how many Invasion of the Body Snatchers movies I've seen, but I've seen a lot. I like them all to a degree. I didn't love Invasion 2007, but I should revisit it because it's been a while. But you know, it is what it is. Like I don't know why everybody's always surprised when a new remake comes along. They're like, oh my god, a new Crow movie. It was like, yeah, it's been 30 years since the first one. Yeah, that's probably why because it's just different. And it's not for us. We'll go watch the original, and maybe the new one is going to be good, and I hope it is. I like a lot of the people involved with it, but ultimately, if it doesn't appeal to me, it's probably going to appeal to other people, and hey, that's cool. But I was also mildly positive in my Nightmare remake review, so what do I know?
Yeah, I guess speaking of that, that's a good segue to talking about In Search of Darkness. And so, for those who aren't familiar, so In Search of Darkness started a few years back as a documentary, and it was a documentary focused on 1980s horror that did so well that they did two more, installments of it. So now there's a trilogy, and these are long documentaries. We're talking 3, 4 hours. I think maybe some might even be 5 hours in length. And then just now, this year, we had the In Search of Darkness book come out. So it's this gigantic book that I backed. So there were people who backed the project. So my name is in there, and it's this beautiful hardback book that got to be one of the heaviest books I own. And but it's just beautiful, and it's a great representation of everything that went into these documentaries. So to me, it's almost like this like in-depth like memento of the trilogy of documentaries. But and it's lots of, I mean, there's a ton of great content in here to read. Wonderful photography, movie posters, and things, film facts. I mean, all sorts of stuff. So, I guess let's talk about the In Search Darkness documentary first. How did that original documentary? Because you were pretty prominently placed in that documentary, just throughout talking about different films. How did that opportunity even come about for you? And um, what are your thoughts on, I guess, that whole series as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, so when they were starting up the first one, they reached out to me just because I think they knew I was kind of dialed into the horror community, and so they knew they wanted to have me do interviews, which I was really nervous about because I was like, oh gosh, okay, hopefully I'm going to make sense and say anything of value. But then I also, for that first one, came on as a producer and was able to sort of wrangle a lot of talent, work with a lot of folks within the horror community to be a part of it, including John Carpenter because they weren't able to get him. And I was like, I'll get him. And I did. Um, and But it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work that went into getting everything ready for sort of that initial launch of what would then become this trilogy. Um, and so like it came out, everybody was really responding well to it, which was, you know, for me, a really great feeling because we just for me growing up, and I talked about it in the documentary series, like one of my favorite movies, like growing up, that was like hugely instrumental in terms of turning me into a horror fan, and really teaching me about horror movies, was Terror in the Isles. So for me, this kind of felt like a really fun modern like extension of that, but in a very much more profound way because Terror in the Isles is like an hour and 28 minutes. This is like 3 hours, 3.5 hours each one, and so there's a lot more. And so when they were gearing up for volume two, um, I just had other things going on, like in terms of like book stuff, um, trying to find like a new home for my FX series books. And COVID was kind of like taking over. I was sort of doing a lot more with Daily Dead because my boss was kind of out for a while because he was sick. And then also in the midst of all that, I decided to go back to school. And I was like, I have to kind of focus on things for me for a little bit because I just really had put a lot of effort into something that just didn't feel like it was like mine. Like I was part of it. I was so proud of it, but it wasn't mine. And I was still happy to come in, do interviews for volumes two and three. Just because I will always love to talk about horror and champion horror. And I really do believe in what those films offer horror fans, whether there's somebody who's been watching horror movies for their entire life or there's somebody who just is getting into horror. I think there's something for everybody in that series of films. Um, so what happened was like essentially when I got hooked up with my current publisher to do the effects series that I do, which is called Monsters Makeup and Effects, which is basically a series of interviews with different effects legends. He said to me one day, he was like, I know you work with the In Search of Darkness people. Do you know if they've ever thought about doing a book? And I was like, actually, they did because we talked about that when I was working on the first one. Albeit my approach would have been much different than what we did. Thankfully, we never did it that way because this is much better. And so eventually it just kind of came down to me getting the In Search of Darkness team to talk with Michael, my publisher, and kind of work out the logistics of it. And even when I was doing it, it wasn't necessarily like a slam dunk that I was going to be writing it. Like it was just kind of like, all right, I'm going to get you guys together. You guys work your magic and see what happens. And then, you know, everything, the paperwork was done. And they're like, Michael's like, okay, well, do you want to do this? And I was like, well, yeah, of course. Um, because I think for me, what I really wanted to do, my intention with the book when I first set out on this, and this is like 2 years, like a little over 2 years ago now, because it was a big undertaking. And which is why, like, hopefully folks understand that's why the movies from volumes one and two are here and not three, because this all started before three was even in production. Um, and I wanted to be able to bring something a little different to the table because I feel like with the documentaries, you can give each movie like 3 to 4 or 5 minutes, but you can't do like a 10-minute thing on each movie. That would like we'd still be watching those documentaries now. Like, you know what I mean? That would be like the longest movie ever made. And I mean, I'd watch that because I loved Never Sleep Again. I mean, I carved out an entire Saturday to do that. Um, but I wanted to be able to give people a little more context, a little more history, a little more setting the stage of what 80s horror really was within the frame of what was going on during that time as well, in terms of like what was going on with the people behind these movies, what was going on socially, culturally, because I think it all matters. Like it's all connected. Like we could sit there and try to say that like, oh, Motel Hell's like this silly movie about cannibalism. And yeah, to a degree it is, but there's also something about consumerism going on in the 80s and things like that. And like the Jaffies wanting to like sort of take on a funny approach to that kind of thing, which again you also see like in The Stuff and things like that. So my intention was never to try to duplicate the In Search of Darkness documentaries because why? That's a I'm not going to ask somebody to spend $100 on a book where they could just watch the movie, right? Like to me, that's pointless. So it was really about going a little deeper and going a little further than we were able to do in the docs. And the nice thing is because of my career that I've had so many different interviews over the years where I was able to talk to a lot of these folks separately. So I was able to kind of build upon that those experiences to kind of flesh things out even more. But I will say, like, as we were kind of going through 1980, and I'm realizing, like, oh, like, I'm never just gonna like do this in 2 hours and then we're done. Like, I'm done writing. That's not my process because it was a lot of writing and a lot of research. I was like, this is a huge undertaking. I cannot do this alone. And that was when I was able to bring in Patrick Bromley, who is one of my best friends. I've known him since I was in fifth grade. Because my best friend at the time, she was a year older than me, went to junior high. I was still in grade school. And she came home one day and she's like, oh my gosh, you have to call this guy. He was talking about Freddy Krueger. You guys would like totally, because she was tired of me talking horror to her. So she's like, here, talk to this kid. And I was like, okay, cool. And that's how we became friends. And then I moved, we kind of lost touch. And then once the MySpace days came around, like we actually reconnected and I realized, oh my God, wait, I've been reading his stuff on DVD Verdict. I was like, that's so weird. Like I'm starting out as a writer. He's been writing. And so there was nobody else like I would have trusted to do this with me. Um, because I also feel like we both are extremely passionate, but we come at it a little differently. I'm a huge like film history nerd. So my stuff I think reads a little more like that, where it was more film history focused, and his was more reactionary, not in a bad way, but just in a very different way. And I will say I was kind of jealous sometimes when I was reading his chapters and I was like, oh, you jerk. I was like, this is really good. And I'm like, I wish I could loosen up like that. But I'm like, facts, facts, facts. So it was, I think we had a really nice balance between us as we were doing this. But for me, it was like, look, I'm on a budget. I know it would take a lot for me to spend 84 to $100 on a book. So it's got to be able to deliver what I want. Like, give me something good. Like, I just want like somebody to come away from this and just be like, wow, that was great. Or, I just need them to have a really good experience with it because I could never phone it in for this. I can't phone it in ever. Like, I never phoned it in for all the articles I worked for free. So I wasn't going to phone it in for this. Um, and just being able to see like the reaction so far has been really cool. Like, there's a gal on Twitter who basically now is like, as she's going through the book, she stops at the chapters of like the movies she hasn't seen yet, and then she watches them and like tells us on Twitter. She's like, "Oh, I'm about to watch Sleepaway Camp. Here we go." And I was like, "Cool, like, yeah, definitely go read that chapter first. Watch the movie because there's some surprises in there." And it's just like I wanted to sort of create a really great companion to the series because like those documentaries, you can't touch them. They've done so much and they've given so much to the community. So it really was about, well, what am I going to do different than what was already done? Because, otherwise, then why buy the book? So that was just my goal. Like if somebody comes away from reading that book and they learn one thing that they didn't know, like I feel pretty good about that. I hope they learn more, but just knowing that there's like something out there awaiting them that potentially could sort of change their perspective or change how they see it, like understand the experience of making a movie and what that actually entails sometimes and the crazy things you have to do to get these things done. um I just hope they get that. And like, I mean, we cover everything from like the studio horrors to the smaller budget movies. We've got the crazy things of like stories from like Henn Lauder and Larry Cohen and Bill Lustig and stuff like that. And then we're also like doing the big, sort of prestige movies like Changeling and stuff like that. So yeah, it was really fun to kind of, it was like reliving my childhood in a lot of ways, but trying to sort of see it now as an adult. So it was really fascinating. And it also made me really, really good at trivia, I found. Because I do trivia out here in LA and I'm usually really good at it, but I've been really good at it lately. And I was like, oh, writing this book has really changed how I'm keeping a lot of these facts in my head. So it was fun in that regard. We won like we had a run where like we won like 2 out of 3 months. Like, and I was like, oh, look at us. So I didn't get to go last month, so I'm gonna have to go back and reclaim my title next week.
So you were saying that this doesn't include the movies from the third documentary, and so for people, the, the third documentary from In Search of Darkness is about direct to video films, from '80s horror. Uh, so still though, I mean, we're talking about a lot of movies, right? So did you remember, speaking of trivia, how many movies are covered in this book, considering they include movies from both the first two documentaries?
There's 142 movies.
Wow. Okay, so that's a lot of
Yeah.
movies to watch. And I kind of love that about the idea of going through it and either revisiting movies. Like right now, I have the page up for Hellraiser, which to me is just, incredible. Uh, but then there's also the other films that people may have not seen that are lesser known, or sometimes even us big horror aficionados, sometimes there's big major horror movies you just have never seen, right? Because you're like, I never got around to watching that. Like I only
Yeah.
watched Poltergeist within the past year or two, and I've been watching
Oh,
horror since the
wow.
90s. It's just I didn't get around to it, and then I finally did, and I was like, oh, okay, this is good. But sometimes I also have found that, like, with horror or anything really, sometimes it takes more than one viewing. Like, first time I watched Hellraiser, I was like, ah, what is this? And then I watched it a second time, and I was like, oh, okay, there's something special here. And to me, it's all the performances. But my favorite part of the Hellraiser movies, the first two, is Claire Higgins. She's so brilliant, and I remember she's actually gonna be at Monster Mania later this year. I may just go just to see her again. But I met her, and I said to her, I said, were you like classically trained? And she said, yes, Shakespeare and all that, and basically a stage actress. And I said, I could tell. I said, when the camera pans up and you're at the top of the staircase and Ashley Lawrence is calling for you and you're just looking down at her with like this look of disgust on your face, and she's just kind of bathed in shadow. I was like, that was the most evil look I can think of in any movie. But she didn't have to say a word, right? She said so much with by saying nothing, and it was all in her body language. And I find that certain actors like that just have this amazing ability. And the thing that's great is that not only was she wonderful playing this, you know, just this dastardly uh, villain. But she doesn't even, she's actually grossed out by horror and like couldn't even watch the whole movie and all that. So like, but you would never know watching her in that role.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think of when you watch it back that, oh my God, this woman is actually grossed out by what she's doing right now in this movie and doing it so well.
Yeah, I mean, she didn't want to be in the skin suit for two. So that's not her when skinless Julia is walking around. Like that's not they dubbed her voice in, but like it's not her. And it's like I kind of almost wish it was because I think that the physicality of that, but it's still cool. It's still amazing. And I love her so much. In fact, like Julia for me is like one of like the more underappreciated like horror icons that we had, like villains, especially in the 80s. Yeah, one and two, I adore those movies like so much. And I think also too, like one is very much a Shakespearean tale. Like it's my brother's wife, and like it's Shakespeare with a lot of blood. And that's like the beauty of it is that Clive brought in a lot of good like theater actors because he knew that in a lot of ways, like horror fans may not be able to see past the grotesque nature of it because that's what we're kind of showing up for initially, but that the weight of that story and the weight of that world needed actors who could really lean into it in a very different way because they're trained differently. So yeah, I it's one of those movies like it totally changed my DNA. I would say even like two might have changed me a little bit more even because it was like the first one's like this tiny little intimate in a house mostly movie. And then two just becomes like Leviathan, and there's like all this like when you're like a kid blows your mind where you're like this like endless nature of like this other realm and like what that means. And it was just, and then like how it like infuses into the reality and you're not even quite sure if the reality you're seeing is actually reality or if it's like an interpretation of reality when like Dr. Chenard comes in there. Yeah, like I mean I actually really like Hellraiser 3 as well. Just because it's very 90s and very fun. but a totally different beast compared to one and two. So yeah, like it's just that was the thing that like I always loved about 80s horror is that you legitimately like as a kid could go to a video store and pick up two different boxes and have like totally two 180-degree different experiences with those movies because there wasn't a lot of pigeonholing where the industry, I would say, like in the last like 10 to 15 years, we get a little reactionary. So there's a lot of movies that sort of follow in the same vein, a little more so than in the 80s. Like, yeah, you were getting, you know, Freddy happens, and then there's like all these different icons that kind of try to get happy, but they still didn't feel like Freddy. Like nobody was playing around in the dream realm. It wasn't like, yeah, Wes wanted to create an icon, but it wasn't because of Jason Voorhees or Mrs. Voorhees or anything. He just thought there was a really interesting way to sort of create a slasher movie that had a supernatural element to it in a very different way. And that's kind of just what he came up with. And also based on like crazy things he saw as a kid growing up that still haunted him when he was an adult. So it was such a great, because you just didn't know what you were getting into half the time when you'd rent something blindly. And I've said this before, like, honestly, I would go to a video store and if it had New World Pictures on it, I rented it. I didn't care what it was and I didn't care what it was about, but I knew New World Pictures always gave me a good time for my $2. And I was like, I was in. And that was like life changing because like, yeah, I always saw the studio stuff because that was the stuff that was playing the multiplexes a lot where I was growing up, or we did the drive-in like a ton. Um, but the video store was like really where like you could find a lot of the independent stuff. And again, when I'd be watching Tyranny Isles, like I would use the artwork from that to kind of look up movies to go find like the older stuff. So like I remember like when I was like between 8 and 10, like renting movies, like, and I don't recommend it, but like renting like Vice Squad is not a movie that like anybody under the age of 10 should be seeing, but I saw it. And like Suspiria is a movie that like at I think it was like 9 is when we rented it. Um, it's a movie that like I would still, my best friend would still like give me crap over. She'd be like, I cannot believe you rented that. Like, are you like the razor wire scene was just like she ran out of the room. She was done. I finished Suspiria. She did not. But she still talks about that to this day. She's never finished it. And she's just like, I can't believe you rented that movie. And I was like, oh. But then I remember like when I was a teenager and I went to go spend the night at my aunt's house and my aunt loved horror. And she was like, oh, you should just rent something. I rented Suspiria. She loved it. So it's like it's such a cool thing to be able to kind of like reminisce it a bit because I think in a ways like I'm always gonna love horror. Horror is always gonna be a big part of me, but also getting to sort of recontextualize my fandom and what that meant was pretty cool. Like it just was like, oh, I kind of got to be a kid again doing this and like falling in love with all these movies again. And there was like 70 something movies that I got to fall in love with over again, and some of them felt like a little bit of work, you know. But we always came from a place of appreciation and celebration for the movies, even the ones that maybe most people, would spend their time online knocking down. But that was never our intention because somebody's hard work went into making it. We've gotten decades of enjoyment. Why would we want to be a jerk about it? So that's sort of counterproductive. Yeah. So I don't know, like, there has been talk about like doing something with the movies from the third one, expanding things, maybe even in movies that never got covered. For example, like the joke was when I came in to do my interviews for the second installment of In Search of Darkness, I wore my Spookies t-shirt just because I love Spookies. It's a weird movie that not a lot of folks know about. But I love it. And it's like, I love how weird it is. And so like when I went in for they were calling me in to do the interviews for the third installment, they were like, oh, you should wear your Spookies t-shirt again because we heard about that a lot. And I was like, okay. And they're like, yeah, we're actually going to talk about it. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. Like, great. Yay, let's go Spookies its moment. And then because I haven't watched the third one yet, I just hate watching myself. I just get really weird. But from what I've heard, they don't even cover Spookies. And I was like, guys, like I wore my shirt twice. Like I double dip t-shirts. I don't usually do that. And so like it'd be nice to be able to kind of even take things a little bit further and cover a few of the movies that maybe just never kind of made it into the mix because there are like a few like the Nightmare movies who didn't come in, a few of the Friday the 13th movies that weren't in there. I mean, not that you need us necessarily to do that. There's documentaries for those, but like the Halloween movies, we didn't cover all of them. So actually, no, we did, didn't we? I'm a liar. Yeah, we did do all the Halloweens, or at least the Halloween sequels from the 80s.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think there's a lot more out there because it was just there was so much. But there was a point where we're like we thought about incorporating three in, but then it was like, okay, but that's going to be like another year because it's a lot of movies. We both have jobs, we both have like lives to deal with. Patrick's, got kids and a site that he runs and so much, and we were like, we just have to kind of call it. But yeah, my also goal is like I just want to like I want people to re-fall in love with some of these movies too, because I did. And it was just really nice. Like one of my favorite movies is sort of Champion. And I always liked it, but getting to write about it here, and I got to write about it before because I did something on the effects for it. But really, this experience like really made me fall in love with it so deeply was Dead and Buried from Gary Sherman. Like I always appreciated it's like this little sleepy, creepy, like sleepy town creepy movie. It was actually being made in the same air, like the same town at the same time as The Fog, which is kind of crazy. And then, which is even funnier because like Dead and Buried needed to have like fog to make things like atmospheric, but the fog was taking up all the fog machines at the time, so they had to actually go rent like those boats like the that you would like ride around on the Everglades with the big fan on them to actually make fog and stuff and keep it moving because there was nothing else they could do. But it's one of my favorite movies because the effects in it are so amazing. It's really Stan Winston working on a level that like he wasn't known for yet, but I think show the earmarks of just his genius in terms of the artistry, and a lot of it is photorealism as well. Um, I love the weird little story that it tells. I love the reveals in it. It's got Grandpa Joe from Willy Wonka in it, Robert Englund very early in his career as well. So that's a movie that I'm like, I really want somebody out there to be like, I've never heard of Dead and Buried. I'm gonna go watch this because I want to just know that somebody out there is gonna like fall in love with a movie because maybe something I wrote got them to that place. So yeah, but it's a fun time. Like I'm glad that they're moving on to 90s, um, because I do think that there's a lot of interesting things that happened during that decade in particular that just kind of gets overlooked. But there really is never going to be anything like 80s horror. Like we're living great as horror fans these days. Like we're seeing so many different things from studios, independents, mid studio level. Like we're as the kids say, eating well. But we're still it's never going to quite do what we were doing back then. So it's my old lady
Yeah.
rant.